Good evening. My name is Matthew Ogden. It's November 23rd, and I'd like to welcome everybody watching to our regular Friday installment of the weekly broadcast with Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. These have become a regular feature on our website, and they will continue as such. This is a necessary institution for the leadership of the country. Tonight, we will be following the same format that we followed before. Jason Ross and Leander Bernstein are here to participate in the discussion this evening, but only after Mr. LaRouche makes his opening remarks. So without any further introduction, I give you Mr. LaRouche.
Well, thank you. I survived so far. The question is this. We're now in a period of indecision and incompetence in terms of policies of the nation. There's also a little bit of evil here and thrown in as well, just to make the spice of the thing. But most people, including so-called forecasters, expert forecasters, are in a situation now where they are utterly incompetent to forecast anything with any kind of fidelity. They may stumble with things, but while we as human beings are distinguished from the animals by the fact that the animals cannot forecast, they cannot see anything except their own behavior, their behavioral characteristics and the behavior to react in terms of others. But they cannot see how the course of history is bringing the world and themselves into a certain kind of situation. What you have is practically every forecast that's made as an official public forecast is nothing more than bunk. It's simply an attempt to extrapolate, as if by calculation, a statistical approach to defining what the future is going to be. Now, the thing about the human species is that no other species has the ability to actually forecast in a meaningful sense. Only the human species, and unfortunately a small portion only of the human species actually does it. What they forecast, what you get in the forecast, are statistical forecasts or fakes of statistical forecasts. In other words, you have people who actually are systematically trying to forecast, as they define forecast, which they're looking from the present and take the statistical estimates or the equivalent kind of estimates, and they will say, this is what is probably going to happen. What you're suggesting, they will say, is hopeless. It could never happen. And generally, in the most interesting periods in history, what all these experts say would never happen is precisely what is likely to happen, or something else which is unlikely to happen otherwise. And my particular role in life has turned out to be, in public affairs, to be a competent forecaster. Now, there's so few competent forecasters running loose around these days that I can qualify as a real expert, because I have very little competition these days. And most of them who do forecast publicly will probably lie. If they know the truth, they'll probably lie about it because they don't want to be rejected by their friends. In other words, if they should forecast, as I might do, I'm known to do that, that a very terrible thing is about to happen within a period of 2 or 3 years, and identifying what this terrible thing is going to be, I'm usually successful. As a matter of fact, I've never made a mistake in doing that kind of forecasting. But most people will project statistically, either in the simple numerical statistics or other kinds of statistical forecasting, and to say this is already predetermined to follow this line. And in every case of a major forecasting event, they've always failed. And the big one, of course, that I caught them on is back in the July-August period of 1971, when I had, in the previous 3 years, had forecast exactly what was going to happen, and it happened. And every living forecaster, official forecaster, and academic and other periods had absolutely said this could never happen. They not only failed to capture what I had forecast, but they said it would never happen, that the system would never be changed, that they had a fixed system. And I've been in that kind of situation. I've also been an activist in that situation. Since the middle of the 1970s, I've been dealing with the forecasting of the danger of thermonuclear war. I ran for president, not because I intended to be elected, but in order to put that thing across. And it was happening. Precisely that was what was happening. We were headed toward thermonuclear war. And I did screw things up for the people who wanted to have that little war, of that presidency at that time. And since then, the gentleman in question has changed his tune quite recently on this subject. But the point is, the way you know it is you have to realize that human creativity is discovery of principles which is not statistical or anything like statistical. The point is that mankind will respond to events on the basis of being thrust into doing what they themselves would never have thought they would have done. This is typical in society, that relatively well-informed people, or people who do their studies rather carefully, as in academic work and serious academic work, is getting less and less competent these days as time goes on. So generally what you will get from all public sources on politics, on the future, is wrong. Right now, for example, how many Americans will say to themselves or say publicly that the world is on the edge of a thermonuclear war, which would probably take about an hour and a half to complete, and very few people will be left alive on the planet? That's exactly where we are right now. That's the truth. Now, the very fact, we've got another fact to consider in this thing. The election that just occurred was dominated on both the Republican side and on the Democratic Party side. The margin of victory or contention for victory cast was based on the drug population. In other words, the drug pushers and consumers represent a very significant, large part of the constituency of voters. And the drug pushers are more likely to vote than the non-drug pushers. And that's what just happened recently, in this recent election. That one group of drug pushers won out over another group. Now, that doesn't mean that the majority of voters were drug pushers. It does mean that the drug pushers are not only a very significant part of the population, and they vote on the basis of being drug pushers or drug users and consider themselves a part of the drug community. And that is what determined the way this vote went in the just recent concluded election process. The drug pushers run the operations, and they have since when? Since the 68ers. Go back to 66 and 68. And you had the U.S. citizens, and non-citizens or underage citizens or whatever, non-citizens, they were all, that was what it was. The 68ers were essentially drug users. They were druggies. And they became centered in Chicago. And that's why Obama is centered in Chicago. Because it's the drug pushing factor, the drug users, the drug factor, is what tends to fill up the prisons. It tends to fill up the universities. It tends to fill up all this whole crowd. So therefore, we're in a point where the question is, how can civilization survive? For example, we're short of food for our people in these coming months. There will be an accelerated death rate, that is accelerated relative to earlier periods, accelerated death rate in the United States based on two factors. Factor one is a growing food shortage and health care crisis. Factor two is drugs. And this is the problem. Obama, of course, is part of this whole process. So the typical American just voted like an idiot, even if whether or not they were druggies or not. They voted like an idiot because they accepted as a probable outcome or something they should be seen doing, which is often the case. They don't vote for the guy because they think he's the right guy. They vote for him because they don't want to be caught not voting for him, for various personal and other kinds of reasons. So therefore, what you get in the press, what you get in general, is absolutely useless in the attempt to determine what the future is. Now, right this course of this past 2 weeks, we have escalated the threat of a thermonuclear war. Now, here's a problem here about these wars. Long wars of this type have sometimes been orchestrated by, for example, the original British system, which was actually the new Venetian system. And that system operated on basis of tricks, and they orchestrated the history of itself. And the people did in Roman history the same way earlier, the Roman Empire. And people do not understand how they are steered, how their behavior is controlled, because they operate on the basis of belief. And I'm talking now about experts. They operate on the basis of assuming that they have foreknowledge based on a kind of forecasting system, what they expect will happen. Now, the interesting part about this is that in human operations, that every crucial type of operation in history, such as organizing general warfare or economic crises and so forth, is orchestrated. It's orchestrated on the basis of that some people know how to fake it, how to arrange things to happen that most people would say it could never happen. But the fact is, then you also have people who make inventions, people who think, who have new insights into how things should work. And therefore the will, the noetic capability, the willpower of the individual, human being, to forecast is because the human being is able to foresee what they themselves are doing and what they intend to do, and therefore they will exploit the fact of the ignorance of the general population and even leading governments, and they will outwit them. The entire history of the British Empire as a sort of a third stepchild of the Roman Empire was always the element of surprise. The people who thought they were being backed and thought they were going to win found themselves dead or lost, in a lost cause. And therefore you have this ability of people to foresee how the population, how institutions can be fooled from the top down. On the other hand, how the normal behavior, like the discovery of new inventions, the discovery of new kinds of behavior, new kinds of opportunities, new territories, all these things. These are things that are done by mankind's creative will. They also occur because most of mankind has no idea what's going to be done to them. And another reason is because some of them make calculations, and their calculation produces a result which is completely contrary to anything they expected. And you're in that situation now. People saying they're looking for popular opinion and hope that popular opinion, as they understand it, is going to shape the course of events. There may be different contending positions on this point, but that's the way. The typical member of the so-called educated member of society today, often members of Congress or other people of political influence, have no idea whatsoever of what they're doing or what somebody else is about to do to them, because they don't understand the process of history. They do not think in terms of creativity. They think of what they call practical. That is not practical. That is practical. These are the roots of folly. So therefore, people who voted for Obama were stupid, especially people who were highly informed. They were stupid. In what way were they stupid? They did not take into account what they did not wish to take into account. And, you know, Bill Clinton did that. Bill Clinton played a very significant role in sending the Democratic Party into a so-called victory, against his own intentions, apparently. But he did it because he was scared. He did it because he had other considerations. He did it because he's not a fighter. He's he works, he's bright, he's intelligent, he knows a lot of things, he's a slick operator, all these things. But when it comes to making decisions, which are crucial decisions or crucially historical decisions, Bill has repeatedly failed, chronically failed. And most other people in government have done a performance which is not much different than that. They've all failed. And Wall Street and London and so forth is able to control society for that reason. I think the case of this is exactly that question of who controls society, who controls the economy. There is no reason why any nation in the transatlantic region should have to undergo the collapse process which is being experienced there now. They're going into hyperinflation. Hyperinflation. Something worse than ever happened in Germany in 1923. They're willfully going into hyperinflation. Where? Well, in Europe, in the United States, in other places. Where is that going to take them? Right now, there's not going to be enough food for the people, poor people especially in the United States. The death rate in the United States among children and others is going to increase rapidly now because of this government and because of the stupidity of the political process, the information process. That what is believed generally, you can say, what is generally believed, you know one thing about it. It ain't true. It's not true. And this is not necessarily a condition, but it is the condition of mankind. And this is a product, in a sense, I would say largely, you know, in the history of mankind, you often wonder where and when a part of the human species was actually intelligent. They take the people who were under the Roman Empire. You can't say that they were actually intelligent in terms of trying to determine the factors that determine the fate of their people. The Greeks were stupid. The ancient Greeks were stupid. And you had a few great leaders like Plato who knew it. You had figures who were great, like, you know, in terms of ability to do this, but usually they were killed. And you would take the assassinations of presidents of the United States and other leading figures of the United States. How many presidents of the United States were murdered while they were in office? Go through the list. You had a president of the United States in the early 1920s who died mysteriously of eating oysters, fresh oysters, on a train crossing the great American desert. And they got rid of him and got the policy they wanted. You had a president at the beginning of the 19th century, or 20th century, who was murdered by the friends of Theodore Roosevelt in order to eliminate him and to get the United States into a war on the side of Britain. And that's what happened. World War I. World War II happened in the same way. The complication was that Franklin Roosevelt outwitted the fascists and got some support to prevent a coup against his presidency and put some people in prison over that sort of thing. But the situation today is that you've got to emphasize to the people out there that it is their proneness to be duped, and duped by their own desires and wishes and beliefs, that they will consistently vote for the wrong thing, for the thing that does the worst to hurt them or to destroy them. They're talked into it, but they're talked into it because they don't know any better. They believe in popular opinion. They don't know any better. Now, our problem here, from this platform, is to deal with precisely that problem. What's the chances of the United States surviving, along with other countries, and what's going on now? What are the chances? Well, I would say offhand, if you want to bet on percentages, 0. They have no chance whatsoever. The trend of their behavior, as influenced very largely by the drug dealers. And people are not only into the drug problem, they are also terrified by the power of the drug dealers, the power to kill. Take Mexico. Mexico is being destroyed by the drug business. Other parts of South and Central America are being controlled by the drug traffic. Parts of the southern states of the United States are dominated by drugs. Major cities, Chicago, New York City, others are saturated by the control of the drug lobby. And both parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, both are under very strong control by the drug interests. And the leading drug interest is the Queen of England. And we had some fun about that, and we got some charges on that. But the Queen of England, in the tradition of the British Empire, has been and remains the center of the drug traffic of the world, including the United States, including some of the leadership of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They're equally corrupt. Therefore, the one thing that is most important to us, which people on this program should think about, what are we going to do about that? That the typical stupidity which influences the behavior of our citizens, most of them, in one way or the other, and especially among leading parts of the citizenry, those who say they know what's happening, those who read the right newspapers, those who read the right magazines, attend the right conferences, listen to the right gossip, they're all stupid. And they're all like people being guided into their slaughter, the slaughter bin, just like in the Roman arena. And our job here is that we have the ability, from platforms such as this one on which I'm speaking tonight, we have the ability to present facts to that portion of the population which is a little bit more open-minded about understanding reality than the typical person who relies upon the public newspaper and the gossip sessions, or what the politicians pass down as the witty thing to say to citizens. The chance for saving society does not lie with the majority votes as they are normally cast. The majority today in the United States and in Western and Central Europe is a hopeless situation. It's a hopeless case. There's no validity in the predominant trends in opinion in those populations. The only chance, and the case of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States is an example of this point, makes it very clear. Only a very small number, at the very top level of intellectual leadership in society, who also have devotion to their mission, that's the only group on which you can rely for leadership. Any other choice of reliance on leadership, or what you think is leadership, is a terrible mistake. Because you're in a situation where you're on the edge right now of the outbreak of thermonuclear war. How will it come on, thermonuclear war? Well, you have a little situation in Turkey. You had a little situation in Israel. Huh? And what did those little things do? Those little things moved mankind closer and closer to the proximity of the trigger point, where the result is suddenly thermonuclear war. And as I've said, it will take less than an hour and a half to virtually extinguish civilization once that starts. People will make these steps, step by step, going toward hell, and only making a step, one step at a time, never seeing the consequence of what that step will be, 1 or 2 or 3 steps down the way. We're getting closer and closer and closer to the virtual extinction of civilization as we've known it. And this is not a matter of a long-term trend. This is just around the corner. And therefore, our job is to put the pressure of influence and education on those strata in society which are not ordinary people. They are either not ordinary because they're very influential, very experienced, or they're important because they just don't swallow the swill that most of the population is willing to accept. They will say, well, what can I do about this? Well, in fact, most people can't do anything about it. Not because they lack the power to do something, but because they lack the mind to do something. And therefore we depend upon a quality of leadership which is not the number of stripes you wear, but a quality of leadership which depends upon your ability to understand and see through the fallacies that you read in the press, the fallacies you hear on the mass media. Only a small portion of the population is capable of doing that. A slightly larger part of the population is capable of responding to that leadership and becoming a leadership in its own right. In the general way that success happens is some people strike at a vulnerable point in the enemy's operations, even a psychological strike, some kind of strike, which stops the march toward hell. And that's what the purpose of our doing what we're doing here is. We may, at different times, different days, different occasions, treat this matter differently, but our devotion must be, and is, that we must be concerned with the fact that the population, the so-called democratic process, has not improved since that crook, Andrew Jackson, first destroyed the Constitution of the United States. And he, of course, is the famous dinners that are had, the Jackson-Jefferson dinners, has been an institution of criminality. But the point is, it's also, you have a Republican criminality too. And it's sometimes difficult to say which is more significant, which is worse. The point is, only a few exceptional people who are qualified as leaders because they can foresee the direction in which events are being carried. Those who see that anybody who says, well, yes, they've got to do that. Of course they've got to go with Turkey against Russia. Well, going into Turkey against Russia, you know what that means? nuclear war. How long will that war last? About an hour and a half. Who will be involved? Virtually every power on this planet. A world war like no world war you've ever heard of before. And what's causing it? Well, for one thing, people who believe in Obama.